It's been talked about for decades, a high-speed rail network between Australia's eastern cities.
I rather like the idea of a very fast train.
If we do not have world-class infrastructure, there is no future for the Australian economy.
But plans have never gone beyond the early stages. The sticking point? Persuading someone to pay for it.
It would be ruinously expensive.
People intuitively know that it's good for our country.
For those familiar with Japan's Shinkansen and the French TGV, it's a tempting prospect. But will it ever become a reality? A direct flight from Sydney to Melbourne takes about an hour and a half. That's not counting the time it takes to get to, from and through the airport. Before COVID, this was the world's second busiest air traffic corridor with an average of 150 flights per day. So it's no wonder a high-speed rail service between Sydney and Melbourne is a popular suggestion.
Melbourne to Canberra in 2 hours, Sydney in 3.
Travel from Melbourne to Sydney in less than an hour.
The topic just won't go away.
In the 60s, it took 12 hours to travel by train between the two cities. Not much has changed. Today's XPT fleet takes 11 hours from Sydney Central to Melbourne's Southern Cross. Barely an improvement over 5 decades. In the early 80s, Dr. Paul Wild's proposal for what he called a very fast train became the first to fall over.
It will bring Australian railways out of the 19th century and put them into the 21st.
The VFT, as it became known, would have been a high-speed rail link between Sydney, Canberra and Melbourne. It eventually failed in 1991 after the government refused to provide tax concessions to the companies funding the project.
In all cases, they need such a high level of subsidy. So sometimes they're talked about as that they'll be self-sustaining, but on closer scrutiny, what they want is extensive tax breaks and the like.
Since then, there have been at least a dozen variations of the idea.
Every time we announce a very fast train, 95% of Australians are for it.
And the other 5%?
Who are they?
Engineers, economists, experts in transport.
Yeah, the lunatic fringe. Real people love it.
The closest we ever really got was the speed rail between Sydney and Canberra in the 90s. But John Howard ditched that proposal after claims it would need massive government subsidies.
You can't justify spending $1 to $2 billion to subsidise a rail track between Sydney and Canberra.
Instead, he commissioned a feasibility study into high-speed rail. It found construction costs alone for an East Coast train line could range from $33 to $59 billion.
The numbers don't stack up.
So you've looked into it?
Everyone's looked into it. There's been like 10 feasibility studies in the last few decades.
No, what does that tell you?
Stop doing feasibility studies.
Exactly.
Huh?
Yet another feasibility study by the Rudd government in 2013 proposed a line connecting Brisbane to Melbourne via Sydney. The estimated cost was even bigger, $114 billion, or about $128 billion today.
It cost every taxpayer in the country $10,000 or more to build high-speed rail, which would mostly benefit business travellers going between Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane.
We will build new, regional, compact, sustainable smart cities.
This $200 billion proposal in 2017 was to build 8 entirely new cities along a Sydney to Melbourne route.
The idea of building 8 inland cities the size of Canberra in the space of 20 years sort of leaves me wondering where those people are going to come from.
The world's most successful networks, Japan's Shinkansen and the French TGV, have been around for decades. But Australia's population is relatively small compared to countries that have invested in high-speed rail. And other nations that span huge distances, such as Canada and the US, don't have bullet trains either.
Australia is just not suited to high-speed rail. Our cities are too small and they're too far apart.
The Brisbane-Sydney-Melbourne line proposed in 2013 would be more than 1,600 kilometres long, making it the third longest in the world.
It's true, it's very iconic, it's true that it's a glamorous project, but it simply doesn't seem to respond to the needs of Australia at this time.
One of the main arguments for high-speed rail is that it would connect regional communities to city centres. Most Australians, more than 70%, live in major cities. For decades, there's been a net population shift from inland towns to the cities.
High-speed rail would make it possible for people to be based in a regional area and only make the occasional visit into, say, downtown Melbourne or downtown Sydney.
High-speed rail's benefits to the region could be huge by making use of existing infrastructure and improving access to jobs. But evidence from countries with high-speed rail shows the net benefits usually favour the bigger cities.
When they built the high-speed rail connection from Lyon to Paris, Lyon did benefit at the expense of the smaller towns around it.
Supporters of high-speed rail also say it would put a dent in greenhouse gas emissions. According to some estimates, a bullet train's emissions per passenger kilometre from Melbourne to Sydney would be about 1/3 of those on a plane.
Because we would be using a lot of steel and a lot of concrete, we would be adding to emissions while still flying to get from A to B.
The Grattan Institute estimates such a project wouldn't create a net reduction in emissions until at least 40 years after building were to begin. The thing is, the longer we wait, the more distant that dream becomes. 3 states, Queensland, Victoria and New South Wales, are now looking into their own high-speed projects. For now though, these projects look like the only way we'll get high-speed rail in Australia.